And I'd like to ask you why you would make such a bold statement.
Well, I'm not trying to make any excuses, but let me preface my answer by saying that anyone read the headline, there was a question mark. It was not a statement.
Okay.
And, but nonetheless, I think there is sufficient currency to engage and interrogate around the role that South Africa has in Africa, the expectations of the international community, the expectations in Africa, contradictory.
I want to ask you about those expectations. Are the expectations when it comes to Africa, South Africa's role as being the superpower on the continent, is it an expectation that has come from other African countries, or is it an expectation that South Africa has put it on itself?
Well, almost neither, because South Africa is what is called a middle power. And I think post-94, South Africa was given this role. There was an expectation globally that South Africa could play this role as a leader coming out of Africa and engaging with Africa, or through whom the established powers could engage with Africa.
If I think back to the Mbeki administration, though, I mean, Thabo Mbeki was seen to, and he did, do a lot and work with other African leaders, and did a lot within his administration, and that seemed to be a vision that he had as president of this country, just in terms of what he wanted and what his vision for the continent was. So when you talk about the expectation that was put on South Africa, I have to say, though, that if you look at that administration in particular, it is a role that South Africa took on itself as well.
Yes, and I think that the errors may have happened during the Mandela phase, because there was a lot of goodwill. If you recall, soon after Mandela's inauguration, which was Gali, then Secretary General of the United Nations, approached South Africa to help mediate in the Rwanda-Burundi conflict. Coming back to former President Thabo Mbeki, I think he's one of the most outstanding foreign diplomats current, and we see the role he's playing across Africa. And during his administration, realizing that South Africa was not in charge of this role, decided to transform that role by creating institutions, the African Union, NEPAD, the African Parliament, and beginning to look more internally to Africa. Let's define the role that South Africa can play in a new Africa, based on South Africa's understanding.
Is this a role that South Africa has capitalized on in terms of, growing its own power, as an influence, and growing its own economic power? Has it been able to leverage on that influence that it's had in the past?
Well, South Africa does not benefit from the greatest goodwill across Africa. It's a misnomer to assume. I mean, if we look at the current Ping and Nkosana Zuma issue, is that she is probably the best diplomat around. She probably could transform that institution. She could probably bring it up to steam with the challenges that we have, multiple across the globe. But the rest of Africa is not necessarily wanting to cede that amount of influence to South Africa.
Why is that, though? If South Africa has had, from what I've been hearing, I could be hearing you wrong, but from what I'm hearing from you and what I've heard from, particularly people from outside of the continent, it's supposed to be, South Africa's role has been seen as mostly positive. But if you are then saying that the rest of the African countries are not as keen to see South African take that position, why would that be?
Well, I think one of the problems is that South Africa is part of the problem of that perception, of that growing sentiment out there. South Africa is completely unskilled. It's a young nation with a lot of challenges domestically. And to address those issues domestically and take on the issues of conflict resolution, of investment, of representation at the G8, at the WTO, South Africa and many other nations in Africa didn't want. South Africa is also, Africa's divided among the Anglophone and the Francophone, with the Lusophones generally coming with South Africa. However, we realize that the new boy on the block suddenly is getting all the attention, the spotlight is on South Africa, and whenever South Africa tripped, it was more conspicuous. But there's no evident alternative to the leadership that South Africa has provided and will provide. And that is the dilemma that Africa finds itself in.
What we are seeing, though, from a business perspective, is that we're seeing a lot of news coming out in terms of Nigeria being a massive powerhouse. Now, when you talk to investors outside of the continent, they say Nigeria is a place to be. You've got Kenya, which is growing more and more in stature every day. So, what I would like to ask you, just in terms of all these other countries that are popping up. You've got Zambia that is seen as, some people are seeing it as a favorite in terms of Southern African countries that they would like to invest in. Mozambique. Is South Africa still the gateway to Africa, or have all these other countries taken so much spotlight from what South Africa used to enjoy?
Well, you know, I wonder, I think in the early stages, because most of the investors didn't understand the African landscape or had a different game playing that was there during the Cold War. And therefore you came up with this definition of South Africa being the gateway, the trampoline into Africa. Yes, South Africa still has that role. Its institutions, its banking sector is unrivaled. We haven't...
And not only the African continent, yeah, say, if you compare it to, even to countries...
South Africa is behind China, the #1 foreign investor across Africa. It may have pulled back in 2008 and 2009, but that is for other factors, global factors. But South Africa is going in. Your lead story early on in Ilovo is a demonstration that if the situation did not deteriorate as it has in Mali, and if we had conflict resolution instruments and institutions in place to solve those problems, another South African company would have gone into another African company and put in 2.1 billion rand. I think that was the investment that they've pulled out of. So I think that, yes, whether the errors that have been committed in this journey that South Africa, and it has learned a lot in this journey, but the fact is there is no respected representative voice of Africa besides South Africa. What South Africa is trying to do is change the dialogue across Africa to be more representative of Africa and try and dilute the stances that are very hard vis-a-vis South Africa.
Daniel, I have to ask you this very quickly. Going forward, what does South Africa need to do to not only be seen as a darling outside of the continent, but also to get the support from other African countries in the role that it plays, not to be seen as a superpower that's probably better than the other countries, but also to be seen as you say, you know, this voice that has got the influence to rally up other African countries, for there to be an African agenda that South Africa is not taking the spotlight all the time.
Well, I'll give you an example. COP17 was a clear demonstration of South Africa's leadership, not only across the continent, but across the globe. Going forward, what South Africa is to do is continue to do what it is doing now, but it is overstretched. It is also, some of the issues playing out domestically are reverberating across the continent. If you want to give advice, you've got to fix up some things at home. And I think it is working on that. It's got to do it quicker and sooner for the benefit of Africa and South Africa's role and relationship with Africa.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.